In this video, we'll discuss anxiety disorders. So before we start discussing anxiety disorders, let's distinguish between fear, which is an instantaneous reaction to an imminent threat, and anxiety, which involves apprehension, avoidance, cautiousness regarding a potential threat, danger, or other negative content. The level and duration of the anxiety usually matches the magnitude of the potential threat. However, some people experience anxiety that is excessive, persistent, and out of proportion with the actual threat. When this happens, it leads to anxiety disorders, which are characterized by excessive and persistent fear and anxiety and by related disturbances in behavior. The prevalence in the population for anxiety disorders is approximately 25 to 30% of the population at some point during an individual's lifetime. It's more common in women than it is in men, and it's the most frequently occurring class of mental disorders. Generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is a relatively continuous state of excessive, uncontrollable, and pointless worry and apprehension. So diagnostic criteria include diffuse worrying and apprehension that's not a part of another disorder. These symptoms must occur more days than not for at least 6 months period of time. And the symptoms are accompanied by any of the three following symptoms: restlessness, difficulty concentrating, being easily fatigued, muscle tension, irritability, and sleep difficulties. Generalized anxiety disorder affects 5.7% of the U.S. population during their lifetime, and females are 2 times as likely to experience the disorder as compared to males. Now, please note that we are saying the prevalence in the U.S., and that is because prevalence estimates vary widely across countries, with lifetime prevalence being highest in high-income countries, lower in middle-income countries, and lowest in low-income countries. It is also comorbid with mood disorders and other anxiety disorders. Phobias involve excessive, distressing, and persistent fear or anxiety about a specific object or situation. People may realize that their fear and anxiety is irrational, but still may go to great lengths to avoid the stimulus. Phobias affect about 12.5% of the population, and some common phobias include acrophobia, which is a fear of heights, aerophobia, which is a fear of flying, arachnophobia, which is a fear of spiders. I definitely have that one. Claustrophobia, which is a fear of enclosed spaces. Agoraphobia is listed as a separate anxiety disorder, and it's characterized by intense fear, anxiety, avoidance of situations which might be difficult to escape or receive help if one experiences a panic attack. In other words, the fear of going outside or out of the house. These situations might include going on public transportation, being in crowds, or being outside the house alone. I will link a video clip of an example of agoraphobia in the movies. Also just wanted to share, I do have a cousin that has agoraphobia, and so he basically lives as a shut-in. He gets his groceries delivered. He rarely goes out of the house. He didn't even go to his parents' funerals because of the fear of going outside the house. A panic attack is a period of extreme fear or discomfort that develops abruptly and reaches a peak within about 10 minutes. It can be something that's expected in response to an external trigger or something that's unexpected. Some of the symptoms involve feeling dizzy or faint and lightheaded, shortness of breath or rapid breathing, chest pains or palpitations, nausea and abdominal distress, sweating, trembling, fear of losing control. So panic attacks alone are not a disorder, but they can turn into a disorder. And again, I'll give you another example from the movies on the Canvas page. Now, I've witnessed panic attacks in a couple different people. And a lot of times they think that when they're having the panic attack, they're actually having a heart attack because of the chest pains, the palpitations, the shortness of breath. And it can actually kind of look like that. So now panic disorder can result when an individual has recurrent and unexpected panic attacks. It involves at least 1 month of persistent concern about having panic attacks, worry about the consequences of having the attacks, and changes in behavior due to the attacks. Because remember, as we said, sometimes these symptoms alone aren't enough to diagnose the disorder. It has to interfere with your ability to function. So here in this diagram, somebody has, panic attack symptoms that seem out of the blue, those heart palpitations, the dizziness, the lightheadedness. And if they interpret it as, oh my God, I'm dying, and this happens repeatedly, that could lead to panic disorder. If the interpretation is, it's just stress, this will pass, this is helping me get through what I need to get through, then no disorder will result. So there is a 43% heritability, which is a pretty moderate heritability, and that term heritability, which we've had before, means the variations in this trait, having panic disorder in the population, how much of that is attributed to genetic factors. So here, 43% of the variation in this trait is due to genetic contributions, meaning the rest of it is due to environmental factors. It is comorbid with anxiety disorders and major depressive disorder. So obsessive compulsive disorder used to be categorized as an anxiety disorder. In the DSM-5, it has been separated out into its own class of disorders, but we'll discuss it here. So obsessive compulsive disorder involves thoughts and urges that are intrusive and unwanted. Those are the obsessions. And then the need to engage in repetitive behaviors or mental acts to decrease the anxiety that those obsessions create. And that's the compulsion. So obsessions are, again, these persistent, unintentional, and unwanted thoughts and urges. They're highly intrusive. They're very unpleasant. They can be very distressing. Common obsessions are concerned about germs and contamination, doubts, order and symmetry, aggressive, lustful urges. Compulsions are repetitive and ritualistic acts. They typically are carried out as a means to minimize the distress that the obsessions trigger or reduce the likelihood of a feared event. They're not performed out of pleasure. They have to do these things. The person usually knows that these obsessions and compulsions are irrational, but suppressing them is extremely difficult. So I worked in a lab with a person who had OCD, and he had obsessive thoughts that the lab was going to burn down. So the compulsion to control this fear or distress was to check every piece of lab equipment 3 times before leaving. So that took a really long time. So with medication, and then he would pass off responsibility with others, he was able to control the obsession and the compulsion. Tried to make sure he was never the last person in the lab. And when he would leave the lab, he'd say, now you're going to make sure everything is turned off and you're going to lock the door. And that was his way of kind of washing his hands of his responsibility. And that could decrease the level of stress he felt because of the obsession. So the prevalence is approximately 2.3% of the population during their lifetime.